I'll start with you, Femi, because presumably, bearing in mind your stance on Brexit, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but this is something that you will have reservations about, maybe around the fact that it means that those people who want to come to the UK for an opportunity, perhaps who aren't skilled, perhaps who want to work and make something of themselves, many self-made millionaires have come to the UK with nothing. This is going to sort of scupper that happening, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the exact opposite of the ideology that Brexit claimed to be about. It's supposed to be about the little guy and giving up free opportunities to the people at the bottom, whilst sort of sticking it to the elites. Whereas, in fact, it is the elites who will get that fast access to this country. Whereas, if you look at the people at the bottom in that same industry, for example, the arts, those people in Brits in this country are losing the right to tour across Europe. That's what Brexit is doing, because the rich will always have those rights to be able to move wherever they want because they've got the money and the influence to do it. It's the people at the bottom who are actually getting hit by that, because the whole point of free movement was that it was free. It was available for everybody, regardless of your background. We've just created a further elitist hierarchical system.
However, Femi, when you don't have the infrastructure, it's brilliant quoting all sorts of figures, saying free movement was brilliant. We got 6 billion, it could be 60 billion a year in benefits from taxation of free movement. But when a person where they live can't get a doctor's appointment or are battling for an unskilled job with many people who've come from other countries, even if those people are wonderful, working hard and have the best intentions, those sorts of paper calculations about what benefit it's going to be to the UK mean nothing to those people who can't get a doctor's appointment or can't get their child into a school or whatever else.
But that's part of the problem. There was a lot of misinformation about that. For example, EU citizens at the time of 2016, the time of the referendum, made up 5% of the UK population, but made up 10% of our doctors. So EU immigration was literally improving our waiting list because they were more likely to be doctors than we are as native-born Brits. And as for the benefit to the economy, we have an aging population. The younger the population, the more of that population is working, the better the economy does. And immigration brings in younger people to help deal with that. In fact, we're one of the biggest beneficiaries of immigration in that sense because of our aging population.
All right, well, let's bring in Jonathan. I mean, it's difficult to argue with that. Jonathan Arnott, former independent MEP for North East England. I mean, Brexit's got to stop the very people that we need to come here and that our aging population will benefit from, and far from the sort of lower classes, if you want for a better phrase, benefiting, far from the man on the street benefiting. All it's going to do is help those elites that Brexit claimed would be sticking a knife in the back of.
I think it's completely the opposite. I mean, first of all, let's remember that when you talk about younger people coming to the country, immigrants as well grow old, just like everyone else. It's not even as though that would be a particularly long-term solution. Look, I think I'm very much in favour of controlled immigration. I think one of the things that we've seen a change in the last couple of years is that actually, as the amount of semi-skilled and unskilled immigration has dropped over the last couple of years, and we've actually seen public opinion change as a result on immigration. There's a lot of evidence, there's masses of evidence that when you have what we had before, the so-called free movement, the idea that an unlimited number of people could come into the UK, pretty much no questions asked from the European Union, and live and work in the UK, that did have a social impact, that did have an impact on wages, and particularly, I mean, in my constituency, I saw so many times when people were just struggling to be able to get a job. They were seeing immigration driving down wages, and ultimately, you've got to have some form of control of immigration, one way or the other. Now, how do you do it? Do you go back to the old system of discriminating between Europe and not Europe? Do you have some sort of American-style green card lottery? Or do you say, well, actually what we should do is prioritise the skills that the nation actually needs? And I think where I completely disagree with Femi is he made this all about money. He said it was all about whether you're rich or not. No, surely this is about prioritising skills, bringing in the skills that we need to make our economy as competitive as we possibly can.
The only thing I'd say to that, though, Jonathan, is that you don't... having points having skills on paper, that doesn't always equate to your potential and what you might become here in the UK, which has always sort of sold itself as this amazing place of opportunity. My father came here, and I've said it so many times on this programme, not being able to speak English with absolutely no money, and didn't take a thing off the state, worked his backside off, became a self-made man, and paid a fortune in taxes over the years. Now, under this sort of system, it makes me feel uncomfortable to be able to say, well, yeah, absolutely brilliant, to endorse a system that would essentially mean that I wouldn't be sat here if it were to be in place when my father came here. Don't you feel a bit uncomfortable that, yes, I get what you're saying about the skills we need, but those people who want to come here and make a better life for themselves, who perhaps aren't very qualified, we've closed the door on them?
Just as a small point, you can't say it's not about money if one of the criteria is literally how much money you make.
All right, go on, Jonathan, answer that point.
And to be quite honest, and I am not here to defend the Conservative government, and that is very much one of the criteria that I personally disagree with. There are many professions where somebody would earn just under that 25,000 limit who will find that this is a problem. So I'm in favour of a points-based system in principle, but I completely accept that there is a point where you do have situations where the system will need a tweak. I'm not here to defend the Conservative government, but to answer the question very, very much about people coming to the UK. Well, with the European Union, we had a situation where people could do everything that you described, but people from outside the European Union couldn't. So you created a system of discrimination at that point. What we have to do, surely, is to work out a system that works for everywhere. And actually, one of the things that you do see within most points-based systems is that actually they adapt. They recognise that there will at times be shortages in certain unskilled, semi-skilled professions. That will allow for a certain number of people over time to come to the country exactly as you described. What we can't do, I think, is to have an unlimited number of people do that. So I suppose my answer is it should be controlled. We should have people come in from backgrounds as you described, but it should be part of a controlled system. You can't have a free-for-all. You simply have a system which allows a certain number of people to come in the situations that you described.
Femi, how could it be a free-for-all? How can it continue to be a free-for-all from Europe? And also, as Jonathan points out, discriminating and making it other countries out of Europe finding it more difficult to have people come here, whereas Europe being a free-for-all. What do you say to that?
So there were two huge misconceptions there. One, the issue of the discrimination. We have the complete control. Well, we always had complete control over people coming from outside of Europe. If we have free movement with Europe, we can say free movement with the rest of the world. That was in.
That's what I mean by discrimination.
That was completely within our control. It was completely within our. You can't blame the EU for our decisions in terms of our immigration policy in relation to. So it's not thanks to Brexit that we're now opening up further to the countries outside of Europe. Not to mention,
Femi, you're arguing against something I didn't say.
Not to mention,
just let him finish, Jonathan, and let you come back.
Yeah, okay. Just arguing against something I didn't say, which is slightly off-putting.
Sorry, what didn't you say?
Well, what I'm saying is that if we as a society have a free-for-all from the European Union, but not from the rest of the world, that is discriminatory. I'm not saying.
But I think Femi's point is. Jonathan, I think Femi's point was that we didn't need to leave the EU in order to be able to give more opportunities to other places around the world to be able to come to the UK. Brexit will now mean that will probably happen, but Brexit didn't need to happen for that to happen. Am I right in saying that, Femi?
Precisely. And as for the issue of whether or not it was a free-for-all, it wasn't a free-for-all. The Citizens' Rights Directive of the European Union said that to come to this country, you need to either have sufficient resources not to become a burden on the welfare state and have your own comprehensive medical insurance. The whole narrative of they come here, live off benefits, clog up the NHS, lies. Secondly,
didn't say that either.
Or you could, free-for-all implies it's a free-for-all. And then there's the issue of, or you come here to work, and on that particular issue has to be meaningful income. And there's also the Posted Workers Directive, which means that you couldn't essentially come and undercut the minimum wage of the country that you're living in, which was brought in relatively recently. So maybe not all Brexiteers have caught onto the update, but that was one of those things there against that whole idea of suppression of wages.
All right, but I mean, yeah, Jonathan said free for all, but he didn't actually say that anyone could just come here and use NHS resources and the like. But Jonathan, that is a good point, in as much as there were some controls in place. We were able to kick people out if they weren't meaningfully employed within a certain amount of time. So therefore, we did have more controls than a free-for-all would imply. Do you accept that?
But the question that we were discussing is the entitlement of people to come and live and work in the UK. That is what you meant by free movement of workers. So in that sense, absolutely, the phrase free for all is right. Yes, the UK had some semblance of control in the sense that you described, but actually in practice, that is incredibly difficult to actually police and put into practice. I mean, you have technical abilities under those directives, but the UK never managed to find a way of actually putting that into practice, and certainly the UK would never have been charging EU citizens for using the NHS or anything like that. That was never part of how the UK was. So there may have been a technical power, but actually putting that into practice under EU law was incredibly difficult.
No, sorry. Other EU countries do this just fine. I've lived in Belgium. I had to register with the state within a couple of months of arriving there. I lived in Vienna, had to register within the state, show a copy of my employment contract, prove that I was gainfully employed. Other countries do this. The reason why we didn't bother to is because this government has been aware for a very long time that immigration is a net benefit to our economy. So it simply wasn't worth spending the money to create that kind of registration system, because we were already gaining from it anyway, and it was already propping up our NHS. It simply wasn't economically sensible.
One of the reasons for that is that our healthcare system is dramatically different from Belgium's, and another of the reasons for that is that it's simply one of those situations where it's virtually impossible once somebody's in the UK to actually find. There was no question of deporting someone. I mean, we wouldn't possibly have had the way of doing that. And of course, remember as well that when you talk about this government, actually a lot of this is going back to the Blair and Brown government. So this is across Labour governments as well as Conservatives. So the idea that it's some sort of ideological Euroscepticism when we're talking about Blair, Brown, Cameron, Major, all pro-EU prime ministers, I think is nonsense.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are where we are, and many governments, successive governments, failed to get immigration under control with their promises that didn't come through. And I'll put the point again to you, Femi. I take what you're saying about 10% of the NHS being people from the EU. Completely get that. And I completely get that we did benefit on paper to our economy when it came to the tax take to the tune of billions from immigration. But where successive governments failed, and where I think people feel like they were failed by everyone, really, was the fact that we didn't use any of that money, and that's both Labour and the Tories, to make sure that people could get their doctor's appointments, to make sure that people could get their children in school more easily, to make sure that people who were the lowest paid were given opportunities for better paid jobs that they didn't have a perception that they were competing with people from Europe from. And no amount of figures, no amount of billions that you and I could reel off that are on paper that were beneficial to our economy will change those facts. So isn't that where the failure is here?
So you've hit the nail on the head. That's kind of the problem with populism as a whole. If you know that immigration is a net benefit to your economy and a net benefit to your NHS, it is whose responsibility is it to make sure that any benefit is shared equally and so that everybody benefits from it? It's the role of the government to use taxation, to use welfare support, to make sure that if you've got that benefit, that injection of prosperity into the economy, that the people at the bottom feel it too. And if the government has failed to do that, then the problem is the government, not the EU.
However, I take that, and I think probably Jonathan may well agree with some of that, but at the end of the day, people voted based on that history, and they voted in the way that they felt would solve the problem. Now, you and I were Remainers. I don't know if you still are, and we disagreed with that being the method of solving the problem. But aren't we having to respect where we are now and accepting that's how people wanted the problem solved?
Well, I'd say that, well, without wanting to go too far into the Brexit debate, because that's
because I think it's done. It is.
Well, Brexit is very, very far from done. Not in any sense of the word. If you ask the fishermen who are going out of business,
I mean, I don't mean the issues are done, but I mean that the vote is done. The election that took place at the end of last year was the end of 2019 really meant that it was solved in as much as it showed what people wanted, and it showed that people still wanted Brexit to happen.
Okay, well, let's do this argument. You may have heard me make it many, many times. Are the no dealers happy with this? No. Are the DUP happy with this? The massive contingent of hundreds of thousands of people who wanted Brexit in Northern Ireland? No, there are literally people setting fire to buses because of how angry they are about this. This is not the will of the full 52%. The only opportunity we had to give a say on Boris Johnson's deal, which was blocked by the DUP, that's why we had to go for the general election, was a general election in which 52% of the voters chose parties who were committed to a second referendum. So the idea that Boris Johnson's deal has the seal of approval from the people is laughable when you think about the fact that the DUP oppose it, the ERG oppose it, the literal Brexit party oppose it, and the majority of voters effectively opposed it in the last election. So that's where we are on that.
That's an can I respond on the immigration question?
Of course. Or let me just say, I think that's an indictment, though, also of our political system. But Jonathan, there's a lot for you to respond to there.
I agree with Femi, for example, on proportional representation being an important part of the solution to where we are as a country. But let's get back onto the immigration question. Yep. Actually, one of the things that I think happens is that we start treating almost all immigration as though it's the same. We say, well, immigration has had a net benefit to the economy. And I would agree with that. Immigration does have a net benefit to the economy overall. There are situations where somebody coming to the UK benefits the UK, and there are situations where somebody coming to the UK does not benefit the UK overall. There are situations where having an oversupply of unskilled labour has led to wage compression. And the Bank of England staff working paper 574 goes into that in quite a lot of detail and shows that a 10% rise in the proportion of immigrants working in semi and unskilled services leads to a 1.88% reduction in pay, for example. There's plenty of research showing that not all immigration is the same. And another thing that you find is a lot of, when you look at the whole of the economy, when you talk about GDP rather than GDP per capita, well, simply having more people increases the total size of the economy. But a lot of that difference is down to per capita, that you've simply got more people. It doesn't actually necessarily mean an increase in living standards. Now, in some areas, it does. And one thing that Femi said that was rather telling was when he talked about the percentage of doctors being higher from the EU than directly in the UK. It's also the case that from non-EU countries as well as EU countries. So a points-based immigration system done properly, and I will completely agree with you that this government is not necessarily doing it properly, but a points-based immigration system brings those benefits, all the benefits that you get from immigration. A points-based immigration system should maximize those benefits whilst at the same time minimizing the downside. So that net impact you get from immigration should be a bigger net positive.
I just want to go back to a point you made at the very start, Jonathan, where you mentioned the green card lottery that they get in the States. Do you think that maybe to balance things up when it comes to people who perhaps are unskilled and unqualified but want to come to the UK, and the UK is, I'm so proud of the UK that this is somewhere that someone can come and work hard and almost become British by their outlook, by the fact that they want to get involved, they want to get a job, they don't mind starting at the bottom. That is, I think, one of the most amazing things about Britain. Do you think that maybe we should do some sort of lottery system so that there is at least some opportunity for people who don't on paper qualify for points but can still come here and live the dream, for want of a better phrase?
I think there's an argument for that. I think there's also a point where when we talk about that social reason for doing something, actually, a lot of that should come through the asylum system, that basically asylum is a moral issue. It's an issue where when you have people who are genuinely fleeing persecution and people who we should be helping in the UK. So I think a lot of that should be down to how we approach asylum I've got a lot of views on how we could do that more efficiently than we do at the moment. I think sometimes there are people who are in the most horrific situations, who find themselves in refugee settlements, who just don't get that much help. But then we look at people coming from Calais differently, and I that's a big issue. But I certainly think there is a place for that. But again, that is something which, when we're talking about, asylum is a moral issue, but when we're talking about people coming to the UK for economic reasons, there is an economic question. So any sort of green card style system needs to be limited by numbers.
All right,
and that
all right.
Fundamentally is the difference between the old system and where we should be heading.
Very brief final word for you, Femi.
This is the unfair system we're talking about. If we're basically saying that if you are working class and low skilled, which is generally going to hit younger people and people from working class backgrounds, then you essentially lose the right to basically live and work in another country. That's the world we're creating here. Because if other countries do what we're doing, which is going to happen and is already happening, because we are being shut out.
But those are the people here in the UK who are losing out.
Just let me finish this point, Jonathan.
That's what's happening now. 25,000 people worked in the seasonal holiday hotel industry, and they worked across Europe. Those people will all be out of a job. Those jobs for British people will be gone.
All right. There we must leave it. Femi Oluwole, British political activist. Jonathan Arnott, former independent MEP for North East England. Very spirited debate. Really appreciated both of you there. Both so passionate about what you're saying, and I want to know what you're saying next.